So, the last time we talked about Expedition 33, we discussed the way the game introduces the stakes of its story with frightening precision. Naturally, those of you that were a bit further along than me at the time made it clear that the gommage was merely the beginning. That said, I was not prepared for the grip this title has had on my throat since I began playing, and finally, I can deliver my review of what I can only describe as a full course meal. Yo, Havoc Nation has arrived. What's going on, everybody? Los Angeles Havoc here, aka Late Tato, the one and only High Priest of the congregation. Welcome back to another installment of Late Tato Clips, where we've got a little bit of everything. And today, my dear congregation, we are going to discuss at length Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a beautiful and lovingly crafted flagship title from Sandfall Interactive. Expedition 33 has received almost non-stop high praise across the gaming community ever since its arrival on April 24th of this year, and has earned top ratings from numerous outlets. Serving as a love letter to similar games in the genre such as Final Fantasy, Expedition 33 delivers a powerful narrative soaked in emotion, interlaced with dynamic turn-based combat and third-person exploration. Ironically, the game sold 3.3 million copies in its first 33 days out, and I can only imagine that that number has gone up since. I personally would consider it my game of the year, and I feel that Sandfall, as well as all of the voice actors, musicians, and other talented artists involved, deserve every last ounce of praise for bringing such an incredible piece of art to life. All that said, in today's video, I want to break the game down further and discuss each and every element that comes together to create this unforgettable meal of sorts. Please note that as we continue this discussion, we will be talking about the full story as well as the endings. So if you haven't completed the game yet, this is your spoiler warning to stop the video and come back after you've beaten it once or twice. Now, if we're looking at any full course meal done right, you have three essentials: the appetizer, the main course, and you've always got to leave room for dessert. In the case of Expedition 33, the appetizer is presented in its music and its atmosphere. Right off the bat, when the game starts up, your ears are blessed with the sound of guitar and soothing vocals from the song Lumière, which also has alternate variations throughout the soundtrack. At the same time that the song is playing, you're also being introduced to the world and the characters that you will come to know. As a musician myself, I do have a very big fondness for music that runs deep. I also very much appreciate when the music is used so well in setting the tone for scenes. I mean, honestly, as you progress through the game, there are so many fun, emotional, and downright epic scenes accompanied by some of the most incredible musical numbers I've ever heard. I mean, seriously, imagine you're literally fighting for your life and you can't even decide on an attack because the boss music is just a vibe. The man behind the music of Expedition 33 is Lorien Testard, who is a French composer and actually was a guitar teacher that, up until being tapped for this soundtrack, composed video game music in his free time. Posting his work on SoundCloud weekly, one day he happened to share some of his work on an indie video game forum, and that is actually how Sandfall's game director, Guillaume Broche, discovered his talents and tapped him to create the music for Expedition 33. Lorien crafted the sounds of each scene carefully and even dedicated particular instrumentation to each character to lend to their presence within the story, such as cello for Gustave and the saxophone for Minoko. Lorien also collaborated with French singer Alice Duport-Percier, whom not only lended her voice, but her own songwriting to the project as well, working together with Lorien to create the music and lyrics that we hear throughout the game. I found this information on the Expedition 33 website, and if you'd like to read a little bit more on how the behind the scenes went with crafting the soundtrack, I've linked the article in the description of this video. And again, the music coupled with the game's overall aesthetic beauty were the first things to enrapture me when I began playing. That is, until the story hit me like a ton of bricks. Now, strap in, because we're about to go for a ride. Imagine for a moment that those you love dearly are destined to fade into nothingness before your eyes. There's no bargaining, no extra time, they're just gone. This is the truth and reality of those living in Lumière when the game begins. The world is broken, and melancholy seems to be everyone's general drug of choice when faced with the inevitable. The moment the paintress rises and paints a new number on her monolith, tragedy strikes. This was the moment I knew the game had me, because I needed answers, and I was committed. Paintress had to go. Of course, these things are never just that simple, and Expedition 33 does not hold your hand when it comes to the brutality of the world beyond Lumière. I mean, when the expedition lands on the continent to start their journey, they encounter an older man, which to the expeditioners and the player is impossible. But their questions on how he's survived through the gommage are answered with violence. Because the old man, he kills the expedition's leader, and the remaining expeditioners are quickly attacked by creatures known as Nevrons. The player resumes control over Gustave, and thus begins Act 1, which sees Gustave reuniting with Lune and Maël, as well as Ciel. The group encounters beings known as Gestrels, as well as Esquier, whom joins the expedition and helps them traverse the continent. They also meet a humanoid creature that simply refers to themselves as the Curator, but throughout the journey, the group realizes that Nevrons seem to be trapping the chroma of those they kill within their bodies. Chroma, at this time, is explained to be a life force flowing through all of those that populate the world. As Act 1 reaches its conclusion, the game pivots in a completely unexpected direction.
Wanna throw one more rock?
The others are waiting, but...
You might reach her.
Okay. Ooh, what about that one?
Does it really matter?
Well, you know, like I always say, it's not about the rock. It's more about...
Gustav.
Run.
It is in a moment of victory that Gustave is brutally taken off the board. He dies valiantly protecting Maël from the same old man that met the expedition when they first landed. Now, it's at this point while playing that I'm now screaming at my television, like, what? Y'all killed the main guy. Like how? Like, I was in shock. And ironically, right before I got to that moment, I was just thinking to myself, like, how odd it was that Gustave's skill tree was so locked off as opposed to everyone else's when I was leveling everyone up. Needless to say, I didn't particularly care for the way the game decided to answer that internal question, but in the wake of Gustave's death, a new figure makes themselves known. And it's here where we meet Verso. And so begins Act 2.
So that's it. You've set us down this path. But are you ready for the consequences?
She'll never paint again.
Verso's introduction brings the revelation that he, along with the old man, known as Renoir, were members of the first ever expedition, Expedition 0. Verso also explains that for reasons unknown, or in hindsight, reasons kept hidden, Verso, Renoir, and a select few others were given immortality by the paintress, and as such have stopped aging and are also unaffected by the gommage. With Verso's help, the expedition ventures deeper into the continent, traveling across the forgotten battlefield where they lay Gustave's remains to rest. The group's general destination at this point of the game is Old Lumière, which is a portion of the expedition's home that was once part of the continent, until an event known only as the Fracture separated it from the rest. Verso at this point has advised the group that their goal should be to destroy the Paintress's heart, but it is a dangerous path, so Verso also suggests a detour in their path in order to recruit an old friend of his, a shape-shifting gestural known only as Minoko, who also happens to speak our language. Now, with Minoko officially part of the party, they move on to Old Lumière, and though briefly separated, the team finds themselves once again reunited and face-to-face with Renoir outside of the latter's mansion. Luna and Ciel angrily question Verso at this time, revealing that they've discovered that Renoir is not just the commander of Expedition Zero, but also as Verso's estranged father. With little time for arguments, the expedition challenges Renoir and fight him to a stalemate. Renoir angrily attempts to mortally wound Maëlle, while Verso puts himself between them, blocking the blow. It's at this point that time freezes and Maëlle notices that only she is in motion. At the same time, a mysterious young girl wearing a porcelain mask to conceal burn scars appears to Maëlle, and the two share a moment of quiet observation before this young stranger, Renoir, and the mansion vanish. The expedition returns to normal with Verso cursing at the failed attempt, and back at camp, the group discusses their next move, given that the monolith, while within reach, is protected by a thick barrier of highly dense chroma. Verso explains that anyone that attempts to cross the barrier is instantaneously gommaged, and in fact, I didn't realize this while playing, but found it out later, there's actually a cutscene that plays if you approach the barrier prior to meeting some gameplay requirements that will actually show the danger of trying to do this. However, since I trusted the dialogue that the game gave me, I don't have a recording of that scene for reference. Anyhow, it's at this point that the curator suggests that the expedition attempt to defeat the Axons, which are these massive creatures that take up residence across the continent. There are 4 in total, but only 2 that are needed. The curator adds that if the expedition is successful, it can actually use 2 Axon hearts to form a weapon that can break the barrier protecting the monolith. Despite the risk and danger, Expedition 33 challenges and defeats Seren and Visages on their respective isles, and once the curator is given their hearts, it creates a weapon for Maëlle called Barrier Breaker. And with this weapon in tow, the expedition breaks through the barrier, and at long last, they've reached their final goal. As they approach the monolith, the massive body of the Paintress comes into view. Sitting knees to chest, head buried into her arms, it's a beautifully tragic sight. Nevertheless, it's a point of no return, and once at her feet, the group attacks. The onslaught proves to be futile, however, as each attack does nothing. At this point, Maëlle realizes that there's actually a gateway that will take them into the monolith. Once inside, they found an amalgamated landscape made up of all the locations you visited previously throughout the course of the game. As they traverse it, they reach points where the color fades and they are presented with monochromatic visuals. Maëlle refers to these as the Paintress's memories and explains that for some reason she feels a connection to them. Before they can reach the monolith's peak, however, they are once again confronted for a final time by Renoir.
We're taking her down.
She's not the only one who grieves. The pain of losing you, she made me inherited. Punishment, perhaps, for not being there when it mattered. I refuse to lose my son.
That son was a stranger.
But you're not. You're not.
You lost me years ago, and I lost you.
So you leave us no choice. Tell me, how are you different from her in doing this?
I'm tired.
So trust me. We are your family.
Family is complicated.
saving you means losing you, then so be it.
We only need to incapacitate him.
We'll find a way to kill him.
Though it is a tough fight, the expedition emerges victorious, and this is when the curator appears and approaches Renoir, who actually recognizes it.
At long last, we meet. This is all you have left of your son. Destroying it won't bring your wife back. It will only destroy the last tie you have to each other.
With little time to process what the group witnesses, they move on and finally confront the paintress.
That's her. The paintress.
She looks like the curator. Renoir. He mentioned the curator's wife. She's the paintress.
Despite the uneasiness they feel after finally coming face to face with the being that's been responsible for so much pain and sorrow, they do battle. And when it's all said and done, the paintress surrenders to her fate. She even goes as far as to heal those she's wounded in the fight. Finally, while Verso holds her in his arms, Mael gomages the paintress. Now, there's noticeable turmoil in Verso throughout this entire moment. And even after everything's said and done, Minoko also seems uneasy, despite the victory. Nevertheless, Expedition 33 returns home to Lumière, to pageantry and celebration. It's truly a bittersweet moment, especially as Mael reunites with Gustave's sister Emma and his young apprentices. They silently acknowledge the reality of Gustave's absence and what it means. Verso, on the other hand, walks over and takes a seat on the docks, pulling out a letter that is addressed to Mael, handed to him prior to their confrontation with the paintress by the masked girl from before, who is revealed to be Verso's sister, Alicia. It is in this yet another moment of victory and jubilation that another veil drops. Alicia's voice begins to unravel the mystery, answering the questions lingering still from the battle with the paintress. She speaks of the true architect of the gommage and how the paintress and her monolith had always been a warning, an attempt in vain to save those she could. With her gone, a massive wave is released from the continent, and when it hits, no one is safe. In a truly jaw-dropping moment, every last citizen of Lumière is gommaged. It is sudden and devastatingly swift. The entirety of everyone you just saved, including the expedition itself, is reduced to nothing but petals. The final image is of Maëlle falling to her knees and resigning to her fate, and so concludes Act 2. It's here where the game's first epilogue begins, and we travel back in time to monolith year 49. But in a strange twist, we take control over a scarred girl strikingly similar in resemblance to Maëlle, but with Alicia's scars. We wake up inside a manner similar to the one that we've been seeing throughout the game. However, there's one exception that is very easy to overlook. The Eiffel Tower is erect and intact. Furthermore, there's a voice that we haven't heard before calling out to an Alicia. As you get around and you follow the voice throughout the manor, you come to a workshop that is filled with various paintings, with one at the center of the room glowing with an eerie power. There's a couple standing before it in stasis, their eyes seemingly painted over, and they are, for all intents and purposes, unresponsive. A young woman approaches from behind the painting and leans against it, her eyes previously painted over but now returning to normal. This is Clair Obscur. Through talking with her, we finally gain an understanding of what we've been witnessing. The world that we've been playing in is actually a canvas world, originally painted by Clair and Alicia's brother Verso, who died tragically in a fire sometime before the events unfolding before us. The Obscur family are painters, and as such, have the ability to bring their creations to life within these worlds. It's explained that whomever takes ownership of a canvas controls the chroma, or color, within it, and therefore would wield godlike power over said world. Painters also have the ability to enter these worlds, and Aline, the Obscur family's matriarch, did just that, and has become the entity we initially met as the Paintress. She entered the canvas and took control of it in an attempt to escape the grief of her shattered family. The canvas, initially inhabited solely by the Gestrels, Grandees, and Esquier, saw new denizens in the form of Lumiérans, formed by Aline's hand, including a near-perfect though haunting iteration of her family, including her dead son. That's right. The Verso that we've been playing as is a painted version of the original, Aline's interpretation of her son. There is a downside, of course, to all of this, and it happens to be the linchpin and catalyst of our story. The longer a painter stays within a canvas, the more adverse an effect it can have on their person. While there is time dilation at play when they enter a canvas, their bodies enter a form of stasis, as we see with Aline and Renoir, her husband, in the manor workshop. Clair seems to be coming out of this stasis when you encounter her, and it's alluded to that prolonged stays inside a canvas can even prove fatal to painters, likely due to the gradual degradation of the psyche. The fear of losing Aline once she ends up venturing into Verso's canvas only to not return prompts Renoir to enter the canvas to quote-unquote save her, and it is this conflict that leads to what the inhabitants of the painting experience as the fracture. With Renoir and Aline both being powerful painters, their battle forever alters the landscape of their son's art and ends in a stalemate. It's not explained how per se, but this is when the monolith is erected, with Aline trapping Renoir beneath and the latter trapping her at its peak. It takes all Aline has to maintain what remains of Verso's work, and as she becomes weaker year by year, Renoir is able to use his own power to erase generations of her creations through the gommage. Clair, in this time, has tried helping her father by creating the Nevrons. As mentioned earlier, Lumiérians killed by Nevrons effectively have their chroma trapped within their bodies, preventing the chroma from returning to Aline, rendering her helpless. All she can do is attempt to warn her creations of their impending doom, which she does by painting the numbers on her monolith. It is a devastating cycle with no true happy endings for anyone involved. It is at this point where the story comes full circle, as we realize the character we have control over is in fact Alicia. Now, she enters Verso's canvas, but due to her lack of skill in comparison to her mother and sister, she's painted over by Aline's chroma and is reborn in Lumière as Maëlle, and she lives an entirely new life with no recollection of her true self or her powers. That is until Renoir is freed from his prison and enacts the final gommage at the end of Act 2. Act 3 begins with Maëlle finding Verso in the empty streets of Lumière. They share a warm moment and she scolds him for not helping her remember sooner. Armed with her memory now intact, Maëlle resolves to speak with Renoir in order to persuade him not to erase the canvas, which effectively serves as the only piece of their Verso that they have left. I know you're probably wondering how speaking with Renoir is possible since he was gommage towards the end of Act 2. That said, remember how I mentioned Aline had painted her own interpretation of her family into the canvas? That was the painted Renoir that we faced back then. The curator, as it turns out, was a projection of the true Renoir that was able to escape his prison from beneath the monolith in a limited capacity until the expedition defeated the Paintress. Renoir meets Maëlle and Verso in Lumiere's harbor, and the joyful reunion between father and daughter is short-lived when Renoir then looks to Verso and offers apologies for what's effectively been the selfish whim of a grieving mother. When Maëlle realizes through this that Renoir still intends to erase the canvas, they argue, and Renoir summons his own Nevron-like creatures. Minoko and Esquier arrive just in time to save Verso and Maëlle from Renoir, and they travel back to camp on the continent, and it's here that Maëlle, determined to try to get a hold of her Paintress abilities, tries a few times to return Ciel and Lune, only to fail. It's not until Verso steps in and provides guidance that she is able to grasp the concept of these powers and use them to restore her friends, much to their shock. While Ciel and Lune understandably harbor frustration with Verso for withholding so much from them, their path had become quite clear, and their next steps were obvious. If the canvas is to survive, Renoir must be defeated and expelled from it, and then Maëlle, in theory, could use her powers to help repair the world her brother so lovingly crafted. And as Minoko says,
Time for the greatest expedition in history.
While there is an in-game story beat, or actually a couple that I plan to speak on in the next section of the video, this is the point where players first gain the option to complete the game. Using her powers, Maëlle and the expedition revisit everywhere they've previously traveled, gathering the trapped expeditioner chroma from their bodies. Upon returning to Lumière, Maëlle is able to use this chroma to summon the fallen expeditioners to aid them against Renoir's creations. The battle rages throughout the streets of Lumière until you finally confront Renoir himself. Despite passionate pleas, it becomes clear that nothing will be settled through discussion, and so the final battle begins. Father against daughter, an expedition against Oblivion, and during the battle, Renoir summons the Axons, which in fact were his own creations, to assist him. While he gains the upper hand due to his mastery over painting, the expedition actually gets help from an unexpected ally, Aline. The Paintress herself returns to the canvas and summons her massive avatar to take on Renoir's, which gives the expedition a much-needed edge for victory. When it becomes clear that the battle is lost, Renoir concedes, but he makes a final desperate plea for Maëlle to return home with him. He shows her and the expedition what he sees in the real world. Aline thrashing about, clearly losing control and suffering from physical harm due to her exposure in the canvas. While he doesn't want that for Alicia, his love for her ultimately prevails, and he trusts her to make the right decision before letting her gommage him from the canvas. Finally, we reach the conclusion. Verso, unable to reconcile with the reality of the effects of the canvas on Aline, enters the portal Renoir used to show the group her state of being. This transports Verso into the heart of the canvas where he finds a small boy painting. He realizes that this is the fragment of the real-world Verso's soul left behind in his own creation. Maëlle follows him and is amazed that he is able to actually remain unaffected by the space due to his immortality. Resolved to make a final impossible choice, Verso tells the boy it's time to stop painting, only to be interrupted by Maëlle, who recognizes what he's trying to do. The two argue, and we, the player, are given a choice. Fight as Verso or as Maëlle. Fighting as Verso means the end of the canvas. Maëlle, defeated, gommages, and Verso is left to watch as Minoko, Esquier, Ciel, and Lune all resign to their fate. Once everyone fades into their gommage, Verso takes the boy's hand, and together they walk off into Oblivion as well. The epilogue that plays after shows the Desandre family reunited in the real world, gathered around Verso's grave in mourning. Alicia clutches a stuffed toy resembling Esquier, the obvious inspiration for the character, and for a brief moment, she catches a glimpse of her friends from the canvas before they fade away in the red and white petals that surround her brother's resting place. Alternatively, fighting as Mael means Verso's defeat. While lying in Mael's arms, he begs her to stop the avatar of himself from painting. He repeats over and over that he doesn't want this life, while Mael, equally distraught, expresses her desire for just a little more time together. The screen then fades to black. What we see next is Lumière rejuvenated, with a large crowd gathering at the Grand Opera House. We see that in the time since Renoir's defeat, not only has Mael brought back those taken in the final Gommage, we also see Sophie and Gustave, Ciel and her husband, whom had died at sea before a Gommage even happened. And Expedition 33 is seemingly reunited as they take their seats to watch the performance. Out walks Verso, who appears a bit older as he takes a seat at a piano. However, he has a momentary pause as he looks out into the crowd. When his eyes meet Mael's, he can see her eyes painted over despite her smile before everything cuts to black. Now, canonically, Verso's ending seems like the quote-unquote better ending, but I feel that neither ending is really a good or bad ending. The endings are two outcomes of dealing with grief. You can either gain acceptance and try to move forward and hope that you have the strength to continue on despite the path being difficult, or you can remain stuck and look for ways to escape, which can often lead to harmful consequences for yourself and those around you. Needless to say, the story is breathtaking, and if I'm honest, there's a bit more, but it's at this point that we'll move on to that sweet spot for the last bit of the video. I hope you left room for dessert. I know now that we've talked about the music, the atmosphere, and the story of Expedition 33, the game fires off on all cylinders when it comes to its cinematography, mood, and overall investment. So how can it possibly deliver more? Well, there's still the gameplay loop we gotta discuss, right? Expedition 33 seamlessly blends third-person RPG elements such as build crafting, modification, XP grinds, as well as exploration of the continent with evolving traversal mechanics. The combat is a dynamic turn-based system that features quick-time events as well as parrying and dodge mechanics. There is a set amount of items that the player can use for healing, revival, and action points, so there's actually no need to worry about managing an inventory of items that you'll ultimately just hoard and never use. The loot chase mainly revolves around the specific weapons wielded by the expeditioners, each with their own perks that unlock as you level up the weapon itself. And aside from that, there are also pictos that players can find that can be equipped to the characters. And once they're used 4 times, they become luminas, unlocking them for use on multiple characters at a time. I, for one, appreciated the refreshing take on builds. While I didn't initially understand the system at first, once I grasped how pictos and luminas worked, it dramatically changed how the combat felt during my playthrough. The key was figuring out which characters to set up with pictos that suited your playstyle, as well as the stat bonuses needed. Then it came down to utilizing the rest of their Lumina points to double and even triple down on those synergies. I found it daring that the game even hides some of the best pictos behind tough but not impossible boss challenges, such as the cheater picto obtained from the world boss Sprong, which automatically gives the characters it's equipped to 2 turns. Speaking of bosses, another thing I rather enjoyed was the fact that some bosses and enemies had unique conditions for defeat. There are the clever petanques that you have to lure to their bases and then defeat in 3 turns once you've triggered their fights. There's the gross tete that will literally bounce itself to death if you manage to dodge or parry all of its attacks. I especially enjoyed the chromatic Ramasur fight, which requires you to literally parry all of its attacks in order to defeat it. I know that last one is fairly subjective, as I know some players aren't as fond of those kinds of fights, but that said, the beauty of all of these examples are that they are completely optional and do not have an impact on your ability to complete the game. Combat-wise, I was pleasantly surprised that I enjoyed it so much, as I'm honestly not a fan of turn-based combat, and that initially turned me away from the game until a friend of mine highly recommended it. Mind you, this recommendation came on top of already very high praise, as I mentioned before, that it was getting online, and I felt like, hey, why not just give it a chance? A couple months later, here I am most certainly advocating that it should be awarded Game of the Year. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the endgame. You seldom complete an experience like Expedition 33 without doing everything there possibly is to do in that first run, but that's just it. The moment you begin Act 3 and regain control, you essentially can fully traverse the map, through Esquia's ability to fly. This also means that you can reach places that were previously out of reach, quite literally. Act 3 also allows the player the option to complete a few side quests to gain extra abilities such as Mael's Gommage Gradient skill, and these extra quests also contain important story elements that deepen the player's understanding of the narrative. Mael's side quests in particular involves the expedition venturing to find the Reacher, the only Axon that's still alive at this time. Another less obvious quest involves finding and battling Painted Clair, who can be found in the Flying Manor. Finally, through another side quest, you unlock Esquia's ability to dive underwater, which allows you to explore Renoir's drafts, which contains many powerful enemies but also hides a dark secret, Painted Clair's lover, Simon. Their story in itself is likely one to explore in another video, but I will say that the fight is brutal and unlike anything that came before. At this point of the game, the Endless Tower also becomes available, and honestly, there's other in-game areas we could discuss, but I think you get the point. There's a lot to do, even once you've beaten the base game, but at the same time, there's satisfaction in that victory alone. The fact that you can be done with the game and still be motivated to continue exploring instead of immediately resetting or just moving on to the next title is a testament. Overall, I have to thank Sandfall Interactive and everyone that came together to bring this project to life. It's not often that I feel this connected to a world and its characters. More than that, the story resonates with me as an artist, as I've long believed that it is the piece of ourselves that we put into our work that allows us to connect with others, whether it be music, painting, or even video games. When you create something with love and passion, the piece becomes a reflection of those feelings, and they are powerful. The fact that Sandfall was able to tell such an incredible tale using that concept as a basis of sorts was nothing short of phenomenal for me, and this is far from the last time I'll be talking about this game. For now, I just want to say, in my humble opinion, that there's not one single ounce of cap in what people are saying about Clair Obscur Expedition 33. And not only meets expectations, it far exceeds them. And I'd argue that it even raises the bar of the industry standard. Well done. And I would love to see where this story goes if they decide to create a sequel and explore some of the questions left unanswered. But this is where I will leave things for now. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please do me a solid and give it a thumbs up. It might be a little bit, but it does go a long way in terms of helping the channel grow. And if you want to see more, do be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next video. Once again, my name is Lost Angel of Havoc. Thank you for watching Late Tato Clips. We will see you next time, friends. Same late time, same late channel.